good afternoon, good day, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us in what I think will be a very stimulating and to some degree kind of provocative session. My name is Russel Hlongwane. I'm a cultural producer and creative industries consultant based in Durban, South Africa. And I have the honor and the pleasure to moderate this conversation. I'll be in conversation with individuals with very well-worn shoes. And so I think I myself will learn quite a bit in this conversation. I have to start by thanking Karine and the team at Pavillon Afriques for convening this very important kind of space, perhaps, and allowing for these kinds of conversations to happen in a very positive and hopefully productive way. The flow of events, I'll start with kind of putting forward a positioning statement, if you will, a synopsis around the direction of the conversation. That'll lead me to read the bios of my panelists, after which we will dive into the first question and keep going from there on. Of course, the chat is open for the audience or the viewers to participate and ask questions and put in the comments. I'll be monitoring this over the course of the conversation. So without further ado, let me get right into it. Of course, the title of the panel is The Rationale and Irrational of Investing in Film. And so here goes the statements. The past few years have seen a general curious shift to Black stories, along with this attention content from Africa. The shift in the attention is both welcome and is worthy to be viewed with a level of healthy skepticism. Companies and individuals working with businesses on the African continent need a particular kind of orientation in order to adjust expectations. African filmmakers need a complex array of support structures to perform at their best under a very unique set of circumstances in which they exist. Suffice to say that an equitable working relationship between Western-based companies and filmmakers on the continent is one that needs to be carefully tended. Of course, this is not to cast African filmmakers as anomalies in the global film market, but if anything, it is to emphasize a different kind of value and currency that ought to underline working relationships between partners across territories. So this is kind of my synopsis of the conversation, and this is kind of the terrain I'm hoping we could explore. Now I'll read out the bios of my panelists, and here we go. And we'll start with Jeanette B. Milio. Jeanette Milio is a producer, executive producer, and financier of motion pictures and television programming. Over 25 years and working across 3 continents, she has been involved in the production of over 500 hours of content for television and film, with a production value of over $250 million, including Academy Award-winning talent in front of and behind the camera. Throughout her career, Jeanette has involved in financing over 45 film and television projects for HBO, Showtime, ABC, USA Network, Disney, Lionsgate, Sony Pictures, Warner Brothers, and Netflix, amongst others. Born and raised in Germany, Jeanette started a career in the entertainment industry as an assistant to the German network station RTL. 5 years later, she produced 5 seasons for the primetime drama series Wildbach for the German network ARD. In 1999, Jeanette immigrated to the United States and produced the theatrical and motion pictures and television content for US studio and network stations. From 2004 to 2007, Jeanette managed a media fund for Far East National Bank, which funded 40 films and television projects, which led to her structuring her own media fund in 2009. Lastly, recently, Jeanette focused on the development, financing, and production of television series. She co-created and co-financed and executive produced the beauty competition series Global Beauty's Masters, TLC, and its spin-off series, The Look All Stars. She further managed the renowned TV series and brand Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan, which aired for 9 seasons on the National Geographic Channel. In 2020, Jeanette co-created and financed and produced 2 seasons for the new series Dog Masters. And yes, that brings me to the end of Jeanette's bio. Next, Grady Craig, who's Vice President of Business Development and Operations. After selling the company that put him through college, Grady joined Bondit Media Capital in 2018 as the first employee in the company history. Now the Vice President of Business Development and Operations, Grady is responsible for investment structuring, analysis, and business development, as well as supporting the company's financing, accounting, operations, marketing, and administration. His versatility serves indie screenwriters, producers, and filmmakers alike, as he's packaging and pitching a number of feature films and episodic series on his executive producing slates. He holds degrees in economics and film studies, with a concentration in entrepreneurship from Boston College. Next is Tyler Gould, VP Finance and Development. After working with Bondit part-time in 2018, Tyler graduated in 2019 and joined Bondit as a full-time team member. Now Vice President of Finance and Development, Tyler is an integral member of the deal team, taking point in negotiating, structuring, contracting deals, in addition to risk analysis, business development, and other ongoing operations. Gould also oversees the internal development slate of projects by reviewing, developing, and packaging projects for original productions. Gould also has a background in film production and finance, graduating with degrees in radio, television, and film, and economics from Northwestern University. Next in line is Lisa. Again, I apologize, Lisa. It's Lisa Osinloye, is an executive producer and entertainment industry veteran for over 25 years. She began her career in the music business as an artist, writer, manager, and producer who secured her first record deal with Atlantic Records just as a teen. She worked with Grammy award-winning group Cameo at the age of 15, and was a songwriter in multi-Grammy and Emmy award-winning producer Narada Michael Weldon's camp, who has produced hit records for iconic artists such as Whitney Houston, Aretha Franklin, and Mariah Carey. Lisa produced the show Famous People for a major cable network and secured such superstars as Beyonce, Eddie Murphy, Alicia Keys, and several others. Lisa is also a co-founder of Fortune Girls, a media brand that has reached over 7 million girls worldwide. The animated television series, The Funky Fantastics, based on the Fortune Girls franchise, goes into production in 2020. I'll skip a bit. In addition, Lisa executive produced the feature film Her Only Choice on Netflix. Upcoming feature film project star, Golden Globe nominee Pierce Brosnan, Academy Award nominee James Caan, and Academy winner Nicolas Cage, just to name a few. Lisa is a creator and executive producer of the TV series The Dunk, which has been greenlit by a major distributor. Lisa is co-founder of 1010 Global Media, who, along with her business partner Simone White, is producing several upcoming feature film and television projects starring A-list talents. And lastly, but not least, is Jon. Jon is an investor and founder of Southbox Entertainment, a film fund. Jon spent the past 15 years in the tech industry building companies to acquisition. Previously, with Warner Music, he led the build of a platform that provided artists like Camila Cabello, Madonna, Bruno Mars, Ed Sheeran, Shakira, Rihanna, Jay-Z access new economies based on the sale of data instead of streaming royalties. Inspired by that success, his company DataCA.sh offers an entirely new way for studios, film creators, and stars to receive compensation for their work through monetization of the audience data they attract. Prior to his work in the tech and film, Jon lived in East Africa, where he worked on crisis response, humanitarian relief, and counterterrorism. This period of his life will be explored in a forthcoming memoir published by HarperCollins. He is an alumni of the Savannah College of Arts and Design. If I weren't a moderator, I'd catch a breath, but I can't. So welcome to my wonderful panel. And I'll get us set in with the first question here. I would be curious to know, perhaps as a start, what were the early indicators that drew your attention to the territory of Africa? And why is this continent of Africa so appealing to you and your respective roles? And please feel free to pop as you get hot. Over to you.
Well, I'm happy to chime in. And also just to clarify, that was a really old bio. So I'm the founder of a company called FilmHedge, which is a fintech platform for financing film loans up to $1 million and lines of credit up to $5 million. My personal interest in Africa is, you touched on in my bio. I lived and worked on the continent for about 4 years. Back in 2008 to 2012. And for me, there was always a disconnect in the Africa that I lived in and the Africa that I saw on the screen. And this is because the perception of many people who greenlight projects, you know, they only see one side of Africa. They see safaris, they know history, they know a certain side of Africa that's kind of been shown to them. But the richness of what I experienced there, the diversity, the affluence as well as the poverty, all of those things should be explored in narrative form. And so personally, that's the mission of some of the projects that I work on outside of the platform that I mentioned before. So in addition to financing other people's projects, we do have projects that we are developing in-house at my other company, and they're all focused on the African continent, either stories by, about, or co-created with Africa. These are features, thrillers, actions, comedies, horrors, whatever, because the diversity of Africa is there. Why it hasn't been explored further is, I just think, a matter of time.
Thanks for that, Jon. Anyone else feeling courageous and brave to come in?
Hi, this is Lisa. Yes, and just to chime in and to piggyback on what Jon said, one of the things that we actually are launching this week is our sister company of 1010 Global Media, which is Bonsai Media. And it's a distribution company, and we have primarily so far launched African films, African titles, international titles. And I agree wholeheartedly with Jon is that, you know, the market in Africa is burgeoning, and it has not yet shown all of what's going on in Africa. And Netflix, you know, I commend Netflix because they have really taken a lead in the streaming space of really showing off the wonderful films in Africa. And it's so important that the American audience, and particularly African Americans as well, that we all get to see just how beautiful the continent is, that it's not just safaris, but there are people doing amazing things there. There are amazing stories to tell, and we're excited to be a part of that.
Thanks, Lisa.
I've actually shot in Africa. I did a movie there, and I have to say that I was impressed not only by the level of determination of the team that I worked with. The local producers were extremely helpful, but also the level of talent, which is not something we hear about when we produce movies in all the Western countries, and really are focused on just that kind of content because that's, we feel like, is the most globally viable. And as investors, obviously we have to look at content that is globally viable, that, you know, that can be sold all over the world, can be seen by everyone. But I personally would enjoy just the opportunity on exploring on the limited experience that I had producing there and shooting there. So I'm curious to hear more about it.
Great, Jeanette. Grady, Tyler?
Yeah, speaking from the Bondit Media Capital side. So just a little bit of background on our company. So we're a senior debt financier. So we're providing loans to single picture film and television projects secured by collateral. So that usually takes the form of sales receivables. So executed minimum guarantees, negative pickups, domestic backstops, international pre-sales. We do tax credit financing as well. And we've definitely seen an uptick in projects sourced from Africa, especially South Africa, I would say. Kind of as Lisa was mentioning, especially in regards to Netflix, we're seeing a lot of African-focused content coming out of that region. And you know, without a proper or a massive banking infrastructure that you have for production finance that you have in the U.S., it's we've been seeing a lot of those opportunities come over into California, and the ability to try and help and step in and provide a cash flow solution for those projects.
Yep, agreed on all. And I think what Lisa said about the bigger SVOD companies making that leap onto the continent, as for them, it's an untapped market for subscribers. But kind of what Jon is saying is that it gives an opportunity to the citizens in each of the territories there to then produce content that they want to see from their content on those platforms. So I think it's the, you know, people who live there want to shoot there and make projects there, and the rest of the world wants to illustrate the scenery and settings there.
I mean, my other question, I think, is looking at how might each one of you be looking to participate in this market. Are you more interested perhaps at forming very sustained and deep relationships with individual filmmakers, for example, or are you kind of more interested at a particular subsector in the market? Yeah, I mean, I think there are different approaches where one could be thinking more sectorial and kind of looking to make an impact at a systemic level, and the other approach is to really think very micro and focus on a very specific filmmaker or a community of filmmakers working in a very particular mode or genre, and look to garner and establish a relationship with those filmmakers. I mean, I'm sure, all of you come from very different backgrounds and are interested in different things. So I would be interested to kind of tease out this question, if you're interested more at a sectorial engagement or at a more micro individual based level.
Speaking for my we have two companies. We have 1010 Global Media, and as I mentioned, we just launched Bonsai Media, and we're primarily focused on international titles. I would say across the board, you know, I've been paying a lot of attention to the content coming out of Africa. We've also partnered with a new streaming company going into South Africa that has not been announced yet. So we are open to not only doing content with specific filmmakers, but pretty much all of the filmmakers, not only out of South Africa, but also, you know, out of Nigeria and so forth. Just really good quality, compelling content, quite frankly, in all genres.
What else is attracting debt financiers like us beyond the minimum guarantees that Tyler mentioned are the tax incentives. So I know South Africa's government is really pushing an initiative there to, you know, compensate and incentivize producers in the area to be paid back out of their budget. And that's something that can attract us because we know that there's actually a receivable here that we can lend against and help produce and contribute to these projects. So that's one kind of market that brings us more into the continent. But the other piece is, like you alluded to, is certain individuals and filmmakers that can establish relationships with, you know, Western distributors, Netflix, et cetera, and provide quality content that they trust and become, you know, approved vendors. they have a lot of that gives them a lot of power and control to make projects and get us involved earlier on.
And I have to say, I second both what Lisa and Greg said. The space in South Africa, they already have incentives that I think are quite, I mean, I've worked with local incentives that I have banked with, companies like Tyler's and Grady's. I do think it is a good idea for all the other African nations to look into maybe duplicating what South Africa is doing and thinking about creating those tax incentives on the entire continent. They are working. I've seen what we do with them. I've seen how it benefits the local film community, filmmakers, producers alike. I've seen that it works from a financial point of view. I'm an equity investor, I'm not a senior lender, but I do like to go into places where I have the opportunity to include local incentives and educate local filmmakers by doing so, educate them in a way that they can become the filmmakers I would then be able to finance because their content is such that I can travel with it. It's great for Africa, but it's also good for maybe Europe. The good thing that we have going right now in this time is that the demand for content, that very diverse content, is so high that there hasn't really been a better time to expand for African film producers like there is now and filmmakers. So I think it's a great time, not just for the nations to expand on their local programs to create incentives, but also for filmmakers, for local filmmakers to really look beyond the content that is local and making something that is local but can be seen by everyone.
Yeah, I would stress the part about education. I find that a lot of filmmakers all over the world, but especially in Africa, often don't really fully understand the film finance process. You talk to many producers, and the gentleman at Bondit talked about senior debt financing. A lot of filmmakers don't even know what that means. And it's probably one of the best tools they could have to getting their films funded, which is why at FilmHedge, we also provide debt to filmmakers. But that requires collateral. So that means you have to get out, find a way to get tax credits, find a way to get distribution, build those relationships as much as you work on building relationships with other creatives, actors, actresses, et cetera. Like the business side really matters when trying to finance a film. And I think that really benefits creators in resource-starved markets like Africa. Doesn't mean that the solutions and the resources will become available to you, but at least understanding them is better than not understanding them. My focus in this whole space with my other company, Southbox, is less about so what I believe in is improving the transatlantic trade of filmmaking. So American creators working with African producers or talent, or the diaspora around the world working with filmmakers here. And the reason why I focus here, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, is because we have the infrastructure, we have the ability to get projects financed, we have the relationships with A-list talent. And sometimes it's easier to work with the machine that's already in place and introduce new ideas than it is to get the whole machine to move to a new place. And so I think one of the, there's a number of great examples, but one of the most visible was, it's not the best example. It wasn't an African script or African IP or African anything, but it included a lot of African talent. And that was the movie Black Panther. That was very much a Western movie, very much corporate, very much a Hollywood movie. And there can be many more movies like that slowly introduce the world to a part of the world that hasn't been explored much on screen.
Thanks, Tyler. Do you want to come in here, or are you feeling that all the points have been addressed?
Yeah, I think Grady mostly covered kind of the points from the Bondit side. I think the only other piece that I would add is we're fairly filmmaker driven and work with repeat clients very often. So having having directors and having different producers that we've worked with and we can establish trust with, especially when working in a foreign jurisdiction is definitely very important on our side, just because there is an added level of risk when financing a production that is based in a foreign jurisdiction than in the US. So we're definitely open to, familiarizing ourselves with those communities and building a working relationship, and just establishing that trust level.
And it seems to me that there's a kind of the sentiment around the table is that there certainly is a curiosity and an interest in working on the continent and with filmmakers on the continent. I'm then hoping that we can dig in around the question of expectations, perhaps. What kinds of expectations are you looking to have met in order for you to participate in some kind of committed and long-lasting way on the continent? What might be some of the most fundamental, I think, expectations that you're feeling need to be addressed in order for us to participate in some kind of equitable way where the kind of the contribution is not only coming in, but it's kind of also met from the soil to other territories.
For me, I think it's the IP, it's the stories, it's the history, it's the contemporary history that can be turned into features or series. That's all we look for. I mean, I think our job at my company Southbox is to get those features and series financed and work with African creators. So they bring the talent, they bring the IP, we can be the infrastructure and the bridge to Hollywood, and that's all we need.
Clear and to the point. I love that.
Speaking from our side, the most important piece for us is the collateral. So the filmmaker needs to bring either a sales deal or the tax credit that we can finance against. The other major piece that we need is a complete finance plan. So that essentially means that any additional funds that are needed in conjunction with our loan have to already be secured before we can come in and finance. So, tax credit financing is a great resource for filmmakers, but the nature of tax credit financing is there's already additional funds that's going to be needed to cover the budget, because tax credits, you typically only get 20 to 30% back. So you only have 20 to 30% of the budget covered. So we can come in with that financing, but the other 70% also needs to be secured. So for us, it's having a complete finance plan and then having sales collateral as well.
Good. Jeanette, Lisa?
For me, I have to say that's something that goes to Jon's point and actually to Tyler's point. Having a complete finance plan, I think for some of the African producers and for people that are emerging filmmakers, I think it's hard to understand what that actually is. I actually teach at UCLA and teach, entertainment finance. And having done this for 5 years, I put together a book. I don't want to blow my own horn, but it's actually useful to research. What does it entail to have a complete finance plan? What do you need? What do you need to deliver to Tyler? What do you need to deliver to Grady? What do you need to Craig? Sorry. What do you need to deliver to Jon? The IP and the finance plan, they're close together. You can't separate this. The IP is only making sense if it can be financed by someone with something. And the finance sources consist of senior debt, junior debt, equity, tax credits. There are different pieces that all need to fit together in a way that matches everything and in a way that makes sense for everything. Because when Tyler gives you money, he expects to recoup in first position. So when you talk to an equity investor who gives you money who wants to recoup in first position, you can take Tyler's deal if you want to take the equity deal. So the basic understanding for me, when I work with producers, which is why I like them knowing a little bit about it, is important that they know a little bit about it. So for anyone out there who wants to know a little bit about it, read a book called Entertainment Finance Today, which I just put together with my UCLA students. I can put a link in there, giving you just a regular understanding of what it is that you need and where and how you can go about it, put it together so that banks can help you finance, tax credit lenders can help you finance, equity investors know what you need and support you. But there is a big lack of understanding, especially in nations where they're just starting to put their content together and they're driven by maybe local subsidies to just support it. You know, a lot of the African nations have just a local subsidy that says, here, go make your movie, we'll pay for most of it. And then you see if it ever, you know, moves or goes out of the country or gets sold everywhere. So for me, it's important that I work with filmmakers that have at least a basic understanding of what a finance plan looks like, long story short.
Yeah, Jeanette, I think that was well said. And I'd go even a step further in that for companies like us who are just getting into working in a whole new continent or a whole new country, it actually probably needs to be more than just a little bit to get us interested or involved and actually going down the line of a real closing, because there's a number of other deals that, you know, perfectly right down the middle that we can finance in the US or Europe that just make a lot more sense before we spend a lot of time and investment, you know, trying to learn a whole new jurisdiction, you know, all the risks, like meet with new producers. So the more homework that filmmakers can do in the meantime to prepare for the things that we're going to need diligence wise, that's just more power to them and an easier way for us to say, let's take a look at this.
For us, you know, I kind of agree from the standpoint of where Jon came from. You know, we also are in the process of launching a media fund. And for us, it's really going to be about compelling storytelling that's going to drive it. You know, what Jeanette mentioned as well, you know, is important. It's the whole financing plan. However, as I read through the comments that have been coming across from the different people that are listening to us right now, you know, I think one of the things that I'm gathering from that is there needs to also be for the continent an education as it pertains to film finance, as it pertains to financing plans and so forth, because a lot of filmmakers, I know last year in New York, you know, I spoke on a panel at a film festival and it was an audience filled with, you know, filmmakers and students from, you know, NYU, you know, and film school and that sort of thing. And a lot of them didn't know, you know, many of the audience, they came up to me afterwards and said, they just didn't know. They didn't understand film finance. They didn't understand, you know, all of the levels. You know, you have your equity, you have your cash flow, your tax credit, your soft money, you know, all these types of things, these terms that we're throwing around. A lot of filmmakers don't know about it. They've never been taught it. Some may be even hearing it for the very first time, even on this call, even on this panel. So I think what really needs to happen is, you know, and I certainly don't have a problem with it, is we need to take the time to schedule a way to teach them, you know, what all of these things mean so that they can better understand how to access the capital that they need for their films, how to access and qualify soft money, you know, as it pertains to cash flowing, you know, tax credits, or, you know, the other thing about it, you know, what's unfortunate, and let's just have this conversation. What's unfortunate is that, you know, one of the ways prior to COVID that many filmmakers, you know, financed their films, at least a portion of their films, was through cash flowing the territories, you know, cash flowing the pre-sales of the different territories. And the problem is that there is a huge misconception that films of color, whether they be African American, whether they be African, don't have, quote, foreign value. And as a result, we all know that this is not true. You know, there have been many films that have proven that this is not true. But me personally, you know, dealing with film financiers, globally, both domestically and internationally. I can't tell you how many times that I remember having a project that had both Idris Elba on it and Angela Bassett, which in America are two of like the biggest, particularly to African Americans, two of the biggest draws. Mm-hmm. And everywhere I went, it was a no. I was told, oh no, they don't have foreign value. And Idris, is one of the few actors of color that usually is deemed to have foreign value. And, it took me an entire year to get a yes. And when I did get a yes, it was from an African American, and so I think that's the other part of it, is that not only does the education to filmmakers in Africa need to be specifically taught about film financing and what the definition of all of these things are, first of all, and then secondly, how they can go after that financing and be taught it from a very realistic perspective. Because, having gone to many financiers over the years with different projects, one of the number one things that they look for is, does this have, quote, foreign value? And foreign value is, basically means, is someone in China going to want to see this film? Is someone in London going to want to see this film? And they feel like if there aren't certain actors, and in some instances, they mean white actors, if they are white A-list, not just any white actor, but A-list white actors are not a part of it, then they don't deem it to have, quote, foreign value. And then filmmakers of color miss out on those financing opportunities. And so usually the only financing opportunities that a filmmaker of color, particularly in Africa, is going to be able to get is equity financing. And if they're in South Africa, a tax credit. And that's it. So I just think that there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen, and that's educating the African filmmakers about film finance. That's in essence what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And Lisa, I'd also say, just to clarify, I don't think it's the sales companies that are deeming white actors like that have value. I think it's a slow process here where they're basing their sales projections on historical information, and which is historically and predominantly been white actors on screen. So that's the only data they can work on to project, oh, this film with Thomas Jane and who else is going to make this amount of money. They just haven't seen the results yet of Black or African Americans on screen yet. And I think that's slowly starting to trickle in. And Black Panther and films like that had done a good job of putting that on the global stage, and giving a lot of visibility for other talent to take that screen.
So
the
sorry,
about
I just wanted to.
Go
ahead, Lisa.
No, I just wanted to just comment on what Grady said. The thing about, the historical information of, the films and using that information, I get that mindset. But the sad thing about it is that it's not that past performance of what they're looking at is not going to reflect everyone. That's the only disadvantage to that. And but that was all I wanted to say. Go ahead, John.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think it's important that particularly in the film world, people, yes, we all want our stories to be told on screen. Yes, we all want more power as creatives. But one of the challenges in getting those stories told is to not create buckets where they're just separate from everything else. Like, this is an ecosystem that everyone plays in, everyone in the world. And I think that we're better served figuring out how to make these stories and these creators, how do we empower them in the system that we have? Because asking for a new system I don't see where that stops, or ends, So, like the best way to really be effective as a filmmaker is to understand the tools. If you don't like the way the tools work in this industry, work around them. I mean, there are ways to work around the industry. And then when you're successful, the industry will work around you. I used to work for Tyler Perry. He's a really good example of that. He's not exactly the most traditional filmmaker here in the US. A lot of people didn't expect a success like his to come out of the South, but he was very effective at getting his films financed, made, and out there, and he became a billionaire doing it. But he didn't create a new system. He worked around the system that's in place. And I think that is, the message I would give to some of the people in the comment section who are making valid points, but, it's like, what are we going to do?
I would like to add to what Jon, Lisa, and Grady said. Yes, we have a system in place, and that's called Hollywood, and that's how it's working, and it's working like that forever. The independent finance system in its basic form has never changed. What has changed is the ability to work with certain elements like pre-sales. When I started in the industry in the 90s, I could pre-sell a movie for 120% of my budget. So I was making money before I even started shooting the movie. That doesn't exist anymore. Today, I'm lucky if I can sell a third of my budget. I am still doing it because I want to verify that I'm not coming up with a story that only I think is fabulous. But I come from a different country. I come from Germany. Now, I'm not an African person, but what I have to say is that the German storytelling mind is not necessarily a global one, meaning we like stories where everyone dies in the end, everyone's depressed, so there's no Hollywood ending going on. I had to learn to tell stories that people want to see. So in my own culture and in everyone's little bubble where they are in their culture, they have to understand that the power is with them in the way they tell the story. Good stories will sell across borders, but they have to be good. They have to be meaningful. They have to really move people to gonna want to see them. So to Jon's point, working in the system, it starts with the filmmaker telling a story that makes sense, telling a story that follows a story structure that we all enjoy. And when you go watch HBO Max and you go watch Netflix, you see a ton of foreign films and foreign TV shows that come to you in different languages and they're subtitled, that tell a story in a culturally colored way, but the story is interesting to me. I watch a Swedish series and they tell stories very different than we do in Hollywood. I watch an Asian show where it goes on and on and on for hours. And the Indians, 4-hour movies, who can make it through those? I think that we are okay, and we're at this point open to watching stories that come from other cultures and that come and open doors for us to look into these cultures and learn something about them. But you can't be lazy. You cannot just think about a story that you personally think is interesting and it has this little local bubble, but no one else cares. So filmmakers in Africa also need to learn how to tell story. There is a writing training that needs to happen on the creative level, and there is a financial training that needs to happen on the financial level. You're not going to change the system, but you can make it work if you start with the right tools.
Does someone on the panel want to respond to this or dig in deeper? It seems to me that there's some kind of meat that we have arrived at here. No? Okay, we can. Oh yeah, Jon, you want to go ahead?
I was just going to add to what Jeanette said, which is, so you mentioned education and about finance and storytelling, which I agree with. I think that's just blanket across the globe, right? Like all filmmakers have to tell stories. That, if your goal is to reach the globe, you have to tell stories that reach the globe. If your goal is to reach a local audience, that's a totally different strategy, and you can tell those stories. It is a different art, and that also reflects on the financing of that project, because there's certain projects that can be financed locally. For instance, in Nollywood or Bollywood, there's stories that work regionally that just don't work on a global scale. And that has created a whole financing ecosystem that reflects local versus international.
Another direction I'd like us to go here is, Africa is this massive continent that is regional and is segregated in many ways. On the one hand, as kind of the language specifics, it's Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, etc. On the other hand, there's like there's other categorization, which is West Africa, Central, Southern, West, East, and so on. I'm curious maybe to understand a bit more around where does the interest lie here with you around the table. Are you more interested in projects that are kind of language specific or kind of appeal or are driven by a particular language? Or are you looking at this kind of Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, West Africa kind of categorization? How are you looking at the multi-layered nature of markets on the continent?
Yeah, I can start on this one. So for us, I don't think there really is a preference or an emphasis on focusing on one region or the other. I think at the end of the day, the films that get made are reflective of the markets and the demand to see them, kind of as Jon was saying earlier. So having a locally focused film versus a globally focused film are two very different categories. And I would say, films that are, less Western focused, more locally and regionally focused, just the international sales value of those films, it's going to be lower, just purely based on the buyers for those projects. So just the ability to get those financed and made, it's a lot more challenging. And we can have an argument about whether or not that's broken or not. But I think you're just limited in the tools that you have in order to get those projects made. You're kind of, I think, as Lisa was mentioning earlier, you're really changing the shift from having, the ability to debt finance and finance with tax credits and all of the different tools available to, moving into more equity focused financing or focusing on buyers that really understand those local markets and that are going to get behind those projects.
I have to say, I like from an equity point of view, I'm not, we can be a little more riskier in that we say, we look at these locally colored stories. And to Jon's point, there are two business models we're looking at here. We're looking at the local story told in the African region that you're in, and they're very diverse and they're very different. And every African nation is extremely different than the other. Looking at the local colored story, to me personally, is interesting if I can work with the filmmaker locally that tells a story that I think has relevance in their local bubble. And then looking at, for me, what makes it interesting today is looking at the streaming services. I wouldn't go the traditional route and saying, I'm going to take this to my sales agent, or I'm going to go the global route, like the general Hollywood route, where I say they have to have pre-sales, they have to be globally viable, because these two different levels of content do need two different things. The global told story that I believe there is a demand for, every Western nation and their coloration, if they tell a story that's globally viable simply because of the subject matter, I think there might be a business for that, and it's becoming more and more so. But I personally do find locally colored stories, and I don't know how else to say it, interesting because they help me understand what's going on. And I do believe there is a market for that, but it's growing. It's not quite there yet. I think the filmmakers will actually be the ones to make that market be there by telling stories that we can see. It's not much that we can actually even see that we have access to as a US buyer or a US financier. I don't even know where to go. So for me, I need education to figure out, where can I see this? Where can I go? Who's there? Who's in the local nation? What filmmakers are strong? Who can I connect with? So I think there is a learning curve that happens on both sides
Sure.
for us to be able to access the filmmakers locally and for them to be able to understand what they can do with us. That is locally focused, but is also globally relevant if that's what they want. I think that every kind of story has merit in its own universe, but we need to understand and we need to build the bridges to be able to access each other.
And Jeanette, if I maybe just stick with you very quickly, what form does this education take, for example?
Well, I would like to know simply, where do I go as an investor to find out about local filmmakers and what they're doing? And I mean, filmmakers that have, you know, a relevance in their local market. You know, I know where to go in Europe. You know, in Europe we have we have schools, we have universities, and they, you know, bring out talented filmmakers. So I can go there and figure out, okay, who do you have that you think is promising, right? But I don't know, where do I go in Nigeria? Where do I go in any of the African nations to find out who are the local filmmakers of relevance that I should know about? Where do I go? I mean, maybe I'm just being an idiot and I just don't know, but I don't know, honestly. So I would like to know, who can I contact to find out where is the local talent?
So I just saw a comment that came in from someone listening, and to answer your question, Jeanette, and they said the Durban film market.
Very helpful. Thank you so very much, guys. I will check that out.
Very well. Thanks for that, Lisa. So the other question, which is perhaps a bit harder, but before I get into it, I just want to say that we've got just about 10 minutes left here together. So I'm inviting the audience, if there are any questions. I mean, I've got one question from Ronya Mann. So if there are any more questions, please shoot those through in the next 3 minutes. And I'll channel these through to the panelists. But the question that I had for all of you is to ask, what else do you bring to the African markets beyond financing films?
Well, so I think it's a perfect platform to plug the event you're at, which is Pavillon Afriques. Myself, Lisa, and the organizers recognize that one of the problems is access to the film. Like, all of this stuff is a community, right? And the community is made up of people. And if you don't know those people, it's that much harder to get anything done. And so Pavillon Afriques kind of rose up in 2019 as a way to bring African creators, producers, directors, and actors and actresses to the Cannes Film Festival, which is one of the world's premier communities of filmmakers. It suffered from a horrible lack of representation, you know, for many reasons, none of which Pavillon Afriques can solve completely. But the one thing that we can do is get people in the room to advocate for themselves.
I wanted to point out, you know, I've been trying to go back and forth with, you know, being on this panel and also listening to the audience. And Marlon, who's been very active throughout our panel, one of the things that he pointed out where the Durban Film Festival is concerned, and just where Africa is concerned in general, he mentioned that the racism, you know, is still very prevalent in Africa, particularly South Africa, that it's more geared towards I'm going by his comments, you know, towards white people. And well, he's saying he didn't use the word racism. That's my choice of words, Marlon, just to paraphrase what you said. And so one of the things that he mentioned is that, you know, they dominate in terms of being the gatekeepers to what actually gets in and what actually gets out, you know, from a film perspective, and what the workaround where that could particularly come from. I know, as I mentioned, we're working with a South African streaming company, and that has not been announced yet, but will be going into South Africa and then all of Africa. And that's one of the things that we're dealing with is, and you kind of touched on it as well, Russell, is that, you know, you have the Nigerian film market, you know, in other words, it's like each part of Africa, it seems to be very different in terms of what that content is and what it should be. Whereas in America, it's totally different, you know, well, not totally different because you have urban content, there's different types of African-American content as well, but it seems to be vastly different in Africa. And I just kind of wanted to see how and if we can address that, because I've been trying to read the comments as we've been on this panel, and you know, Marlon in particular has been very active in terms of, you know, bringing these things up. And so, you know, Russell, you can maybe help spearhead that part of the discussion if possible.
It's a huge responsibility. Do what I can. Thanks for addressing that, Lisa. Does anyone else want to maybe speak to this question around what else do we bring to the table beyond transactions, behind films?
I think we bring a lot of guidance, you know, in these panels, but also just meeting one-on-one at some of these markets. Is, you know, we've successfully structured and financed in our capacity, you know, over 330 films, and it's that track record that we can then educate, you know, filmmakers who are first-time filmmakers, or, you know, in this changing landscape, we're kind of on the pulse and we're seeing what's working and what's not working. So it's, you know, even that experience we have is invaluable beyond just the finances that we're bringing to these projects.
So thanks for that. So I've got
another point I would, one other point I would add is you're starting to see more interest in, you know, I mean, it's Africa as a region, right, as a part of the world, 54 you know, countries within, but as a whole, you're starting to see more interest from Black American A-list actors, directors, producers, in an interest in a different way. We haven't seen the results of any of this yet, but I know earlier this year, Will and Jada Smith announced a focus on content originating from Africa at their new company, Westbrook. There's been similar announcements from other you know, actors who've, like, you know, who just have connections to the continent through their ethnicity, and they happen to be in a position. The British actress Michaela Cole has, you know, done a couple of projects that bring Africa into the narrative of stories that aren't necessarily about it. And so I think that there's this is why I said earlier that for me, from my perspective, it's only a matter of time. And I think it's happening from multiple directions. It's happening from creators on the continent, but it's also happening from creators in the industry who are from the diaspora globally.
I think as a way to close, and thanks for that, John, as a way to close off here, I would like to hear from your side. I mean, you've mentioned a few things that we can do, that African filmmakers can do to equip and prepare themselves for these kinds of conversations that are happening at a very high and executive level. I then want to ask you to give some, to state what again, kind of what can policymakers on the continents do to support and provide the infrastructure for local filmmakers to engage with the likes of yourselves on equal footing. So we've spoken about what filmmakers can do, but what message are you putting out to policymakers that make it easy for you to do business with local filmmakers?
I mean, we're seeing this even in rural states of the United States, Minnesota and Michigan, where filmmakers are just advocating for themselves with policymakers to increase incentives, add incentives into, the government budget there to bring business and employment and increase expenses of and boosting local economy. I think that's a local example for us here, but a practice that can be applied in other countries as well.
I agree with Grady. And I have to go back to the example of South Africa. I mean, they've been doing this educational system very well, and I don't know if there is a way for other African states to implement educational systems where they support the local filmmakers financially, but also with actual education, and then maybe invite people from other countries. Maybe even we shoot there. So I know that there are ways to educate, and whenever we shoot something in Africa, we always have new filmmakers, and not just filmmakers, but everyone in the different departments. If it's a grip or a camera department or a set design, we educate them in all the different departments. So I think if there can be a combination found where we as production companies can come to maybe any West African country, do a film locally, local subject matter or not. But if there is a way for us to help educate, I think that would potentially push the education button maybe a little stronger. I don't know. But I think there is a need for the local administration to support local talent on all the levels, not just the financial level, but really the education level, and not just, we're just educating writers and directors. We also educate the cameramans, we educate set designers, we educate all the different levels of film, making and working on a film crew. Because the more education takes place locally, that maybe we can support in some form, the easier it is for us to come there and shoot more. So when we come and shoot, we leave money there. So in the end of the day, it benefits both sides. It benefits the local entity because Hollywood, as I say, I can't think of another name. We come and produce with you there, and we can do local content and globally viable content, and you can help us actually getting it made by having local talent that we can employ. I think it starts with education on every level in the film chain, and that has to happen locally, I think.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Yeah, I mean, I think building off of what Grady and Jeanette said, I think it comes from two different areas. And I think one is, local governments and regional governments supporting the filmmakers and encouraging them to shoot in these jurisdictions, and being competitive with the likes of South Africa and the other countries around the world that are offering these tax incentives. And then on the other side, a lot of what we look at when evaluating whether or not we feel comfortable financing a film that's shooting in a foreign jurisdiction is the production infrastructure that's there. And so, if there aren't filmmakers or established production services companies in these jurisdictions, then it just makes it that much more difficult to get comfortable with the risk of financing a film that's shooting there, because will you run into problems where you need to hire certain crew, or you need certain rentals, or any sort of issue that you may run into while working through production that you might not be able to troubleshoot locally. So I would say, gotcha. I don't know exactly where that comes from, because that's maybe not something that's a policymaker driven solution. That's something that's driven by education, as in the industry, as Jeanette was saying. So that's kind of what I would add.
Great, thanks for that.
Yep.
Lisa, Grady, what word of advice do you have for policymakers?
I saw Eleanor share this Massachusetts Production Coalition impact study as a proof to what one series, a Hulu series, did for that state and that economy there. I mean, that right there is a case study that I think should be shared with any state or any country as to, if it's done right, you can see, the communities that are reaping the benefits in labor and just increased spending. I think I saw for every $1 that the government paid back in incentives, the series produced at least $4 back to the state and its citizens. So I think doing that research and seeing where it's working elsewhere, that you can leverage that and advocate for yourself in that respect.
Right. Lisa, do you want to come in?
No, I think everyone nailed it. I concur with what everyone said.
Okay, cool. So I'll offer my thanks at this point, but before I do, could you kindly, via the chat, share details of how we might get in touch with you, be it a website, whatever kind of information you might feel comfortable to share with the public audience. Please feel free to do this on the chat. And while you do that, I just want to offer my thanks and gratitude to my panelists for making the time and bringing your kind of intellectual labor to this conversation. I want to acknowledge Pavillon Afriques, Karine, and the team. Again, there's a lot of work, a lot of invisible labor that goes behind this kind of stuff. So I just want to acknowledge that invisible labor as well. I want to thank the audience that have tuned in and participated so strongly in this session. And on that note, thank you.